Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said we weren't teenagers anymore and that needing intimacy was embarrassing. She said it like she was closing a case file, already certain of the outcome. I remember nodding, because nodding had become easier than responding. What I didn't say was that intimacy wasn't the problem. Contempt was. My name is Mark Ellis. I'm 42. I'm an office analyst at a mid-sized logistics firm outside Columbus. I work in forecasts, margins, attrition models. I live in quiet patterns. Wake at 6. Shower. Drive the same route. Sit at the same desk. I believe in systems because systems don't lie to you. People do. My wife, Sarah, works in HR, same building, different floor. She decides who's checked out, who's no longer aligned. At home, she'd started using the same tone on me. Calm. Corrective. Like I was an underperforming asset she hadn't written off yet. The night she mocked me, we were standing in the kitchen. The light over the sink was flickering. She didn't notice. She never noticed small things anymore. She said intimacy was a phase men should grow out of, and that I should focus on being stable instead of needy. Then she smiled, like she'd said something mature. The next morning, I sat in my Chevy Silverado in the driveway longer than usual, holding a paper cup from Dunkin'. I didn't go back inside to say goodbye. I just watched the steam curl up and disappear. Something in me did the same. At work, everything looked normal. Too normal. Sarah laughed in the hallway with Evan Cole, our senior project coordinator. Tall, confident, the kind of guy who clapped you on the shoulder and called you a mentor. He'd been on my team before HR supported his transition upward. I'd trained him, reviewed his work, fixed his mistakes quietly. At lunch, I ate at my desk. I watched patterns, calendar overlaps, meeting rooms booked twice, Slack messages that stopped mid-thread when I walked by. I didn't accuse. I didn't confront. I started documenting, not evidence, just behaviors. Distance. Shifts. That evening, we went to Walmart like we always did, pushing the carts side by side like a couple playing house. She talked about policy updates. I talked about nothing. At checkout, she reached for my hand out of habit. I let it hang there, untouched, until she noticed. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was checking a dashboard and realizing a key metric had gone flat. That was the moment I stopped asking for intimacy. Not because I didn't need it, but because I understood exactly what she'd lose when I stopped. The shift wasn't dramatic. That was the point. I didn't move out. I didn't sleep on the couch. I didn't punish her with silence. I stayed present in all the ways that didn't matter anymore. I still woke up at 6. Still showered. Still left the house at the same time. I just stopped narrating my day to her like a briefing she no longer cared to attend. I stopped asking how her meetings went. I stopped reaching for her when she walked past me in the hallway at home. Not out of spite. Out of conservation. At work, I became invisible on purpose. Analysts are good at that. We already live behind spreadsheets and shared drives. I declined optional meetings. Sent clean, concise updates. No opinions. No emotion. The numbers didn't change. My tone did. Sarah noticed on the third day. Not consciously. More like a disturbance in her environment. She stood in the doorway of my home office that evening, watching me type. She didn't ask what I was working on. She waited for me to notice her. I didn't. Later, she sat on the couch and put on Hulu, one of those shows she liked to half-watch while scrolling on her phone. Normally, I'd sit beside her, ask what we were watching, let it play while we talked over it. That night, I stayed at the table with my laptop until the episode ended. She never laughed. Neither did I. The office started to hum differently. Evan lingered longer near her desk. Their laughter dropped an octave when I passed. She didn't look guilty. She looked efficient. Like this was just another resource allocation she'd justified to herself. I watched them the way I watch data trends. Not for proof. For timing. On Thursday, I skipped the cafeteria and drove out alone, ate at Chick-fil-A with my phone face down on the table. No emails. No messages. For the first time in months, my chest felt quiet. That scared me more than anger ever could. That night, she came home with a bag from Best Buy. New earbuds. Noise canceling. She told me she needed them to focus, to decompress. I nodded without looking up. She waited for a reaction. Didn't get one. Later, she tried again. She asked if I was mad. I told her I was tired. That answer didn't fit her framework. Anger she could manage. Distance she couldn't. She lay in bed scrolling long after I turned off the light. I could feel her watching me in the dark, waiting for a sign. I didn't give her one. The next morning, she kissed my cheek out of habit. I let it land where it landed. No adjustment. No reciprocation. That was the first time she hesitated before pulling away. And I knew then I'd taken something from her she hadn't realized she needed. Attention is currency. I had just closed the account. By the second week, the house had adjusted to my absence without me ever leaving it. Systems do that. Remove a signal long enough, and everything reroutes. I stopped eating dinner at the table. Not pointedly, just practically. I'd come home, set my keys down, wash my hands, and eat later while standing at the counter. Sarah kept setting 2 plates anyway. Habit fighting reality. I watched her notice the extra food going cold, watched her decide not to comment. HR instincts. Don't escalate unless necessary. Mornings became quieter. I drank my coffee in the truck, parked at the end of the driveway, scrolling through overnight reports. Sometimes it was Duncan, sometimes just whatever was in the cup holder. I didn't rush. She started opening the front door like she meant to say something, then stopping herself, waiting for me to look up. I didn't. At work, I changed nothing that could be traced back to emotion. My output stayed clean. My forecasts stayed accurate. What changed was my availability. I no longer filled gaps. I no longer corrected Evan's oversights before they reached review. I watched how often Sarah stepped in for him instead. How often she justified his missed deadlines in meetings she assumed I wasn't paying attention to. Analysts are trained to see patterns without reacting to them. Their calendars synced more than necessary. His Slack messages to me stopped entirely. Hers became formal, polite, almost respectful, like she was managing a risk she didn't fully understand yet. One afternoon, I left early and sat alone at Chick-fil-A, back corner booth, phone turned face down. I realized something uncomfortable there, chewing slowly, watching families come and go. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was relieved. That realization stayed with me longer than it should have. That night, she stayed up late watching Hulu with the volume low. I could tell when the episode ended by the way the room went still. She waited. I didn't move. The next day, a small thing happened. The kind of thing that doesn't matter unless you're paying attention. I forwarded a routine data request to Evan. No commentary. No follow-up. He didn't respond. Sarah did. Within minutes. Covered the question. Smoothed it over. Closed the loop. She didn't CC him. I marked the timestamp. Not as proof. As confirmation. When I got home, there was another Best Buy bag by the door. Smart home camera this time. She said it was for security. I nodded and kept walking. That was when she finally asked if everything was okay between us. I told her it was fine. The lie unsettled her more than the truth ever could. And I knew the quiet was starting to cost her something. The panic didn't arrive all at once. It crept in sideways, through routines she could no longer control. She started staying later at work. Not because she had to, because home had gone quiet in a way that didn't respond to effort. When she came in after dark, she'd pause in the doorway like she expected to hear something playing. Music. The TV. Me. Most nights, it was just the refrigerator hum and the sound of her own keys. I kept my schedule unchanged. That was important. Consistency is what makes absence noticeable. I left at the same time, came back at the same time, spoke when spoken to. Nothing sharp, nothing cold, just neutral, like a finalized report. At the office, I watched her recalibrate. She laughed louder around Evan, touched his arm when she made a point. HR habits bleeding into personal space. He leaned into it. Always did. Charismatic people mistake attention for gravity. I didn't interrupt. I stopped being the silent witness she relied on to make things feel normal. One morning, she asked if I wanted to do groceries together. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were searching. I agreed. At Walmart, she tried to recreate our old rhythm, pointing out sales, asking my opinion on cereal we'd bought for years without discussion. I answered politely. Briefly. At checkout, she lingered, like she expected a conversation to start. It didn't. On the drive home, she stared out the window, fingers tapping against her leg. I focused on the road. The truck moved steady, heavy, reliable. That night, she turned Hulu on again and didn't watch it. She sat angled toward me, knees pulled up, waiting for something unscripted. I stayed where I was, scrolling through a spreadsheet on my phone, reviewing variants I'd already memorized. When the credits rolled, She didn't reach for the remote. The next day, a message popped up from Evan, forwarded through her. A request he should have sent me directly. She added a note explaining his timeline. Not asking, explaining. I replied with a single sentence. Approved. No warmth. No encouragement. That afternoon, she texted asking if I wanted to grab dinner. I told her I'd already eaten. That wasn't true. I sat alone at Chick-fil-A, watching the door, realizing I preferred the quiet. When I got home, she was waiting. Not with questions. With stillness. That was new. She asked if I was pulling away. I said nothing. Silence isn't absence. It's presence without permission. That was the night she stopped sleeping through. And the first night she realized she was losing something she didn't know how to replace. By the third week, her confidence had cracked enough to let urgency leak through. She started manufacturing moments. Small collisions in shared spaces. Standing too close in the kitchen. Asking questions she already knew the answers to. Commenting on things I hadn't changed, like my haircut or the way I folded laundry, just to provoke a response. Any response. I gave her courtesy. Nothing more. At work, the tension sharpened. Evan's projects began slipping in visible ways. Not failures. Friction. The kind that requires quiet cleanup. I didn't provide it anymore. Sarah compensated. She stayed later. Took meetings she shouldn't have. Defended choices that didn't need defending. People noticed. HR usually floats above blame. She was wading into it. One afternoon, I watched her from across the open floor as she leaned into Evan's desk, speaking low, intense. Not flirtatious. Strategic. He nodded too much. She touched his wrist to make a point. I logged the interaction mentally, the same way I log anomalies that don't break systems but weaken them over time. That night, she brought home another Best Buy box. A smartwatch this time. She said she wanted to track sleep, stress, steps. She didn't look at me when she said it. I told her that sounded useful. That was all. She stayed up late again, Hulu playing quietly while she pretended to watch. I went to bed without waiting. I felt her slide in beside me much later, stiff, careful not to touch. Her breathing never settled. The next morning, I didn't linger in the driveway. I drove straight to work, grabbed coffee from Dunkin' on the way, and noticed I felt lighter when I wasn't bracing for her mood. That realization stayed with me all day. In the afternoon, she sent a message asking if we could talk. Not tonight. Just soon. I replied that I had a full schedule. True. It just didn't include her. That evening, I ate alone again. Chick-fil-A this time, same booth as before. I watched my phone light up with her name, then go dark. She didn't leave a message. When I got home, she was waiting on the couch. No TV. No phone. Just stillness. That was new. She asked if I was seeing someone else. The question startled her when it left her mouth. I could tell. It reframed everything she thought she understood. I told her no. I didn't ask her the same. Her shoulders sagged, just slightly. Like someone realizing the test they'd prepared for wasn't the one being given. That was the moment she understood she'd lost the ability to steer this. And somewhere deep beneath her fear, something colder began to surface. Guilt. Guilt doesn't announce itself. It leaks. It showed up in the way she started over-explaining things that didn't require explanation. Why she was late. Why her phone buzzed. Why Evan needed her input on a deliverable that used to route through me. She spoke carefully, like someone walking through a room full of glass they pretended not to see. I listened without reacting. That was the hardest part. Not because I wanted to confront her, but because I could feel the system straining under its own contradictions. At work, she stopped touching Evan. The laughter disappeared. What replaced it was tension so tight it felt procedural. HR compliance without warmth. He noticed. I could tell by the way he started glancing at me again, like he was trying to read my face for answers I wasn't offering. I didn't change my behavior. That mattered more than anything. Consistency is what breaks people who expect negotiation. One afternoon, she suggested we do groceries again. I agreed. At Walmart, she moved closer than necessary, brushing my arm as we reached for the same item. I stepped aside without comment. The moment collapsed on itself. She stared at the shelves longer than needed, like the labels might explain what I wouldn't. At home, she started cooking again. Real meals. Not reheated, not rushed. She set the table, lit a candle she must have bought weeks ago and never used. I ate, thanked her, cleared my plate. No commentary. No signal. That night, she didn't turn Hulu on. She sat beside me in silence, knees pulled up, hands folded. Waiting. I stayed where I was, present but unreachable. Silence has mass when you don't rush to fill it. The next day, Evan made a mistake that couldn't be smoothed over quietly. A timeline miscalculation. Minor, but visible. Leadership asked questions. Sarah stepped in, too fast, too defensive. I watched her realize in real time that she was exposed. Not romantically, structurally. That evening, she asked if I still loved her. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know. Because the question was no longer mine to resolve. She didn't sleep at all that night. I could feel it in the way the bed shifted, in the way her breath never settled. In the morning, she looked exhausted. Raw. I drove to work without stopping for coffee. No Dunkin'. No pause. Just movement. On my lunch break, I went to Chick-fil-A and sat alone again. Same booth. Same quiet. I realized something there that clarified everything. I wasn't punishing her. I was surviving her. And the difference mattered more than she could ever understand. The breaking point wasn't loud. It arrived disguised as effort. She started waking up before me. That alone was unusual. I'd find her already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table with her phone face down, pretending to read emails she wasn't opening. She asked if I wanted eggs. I said no, thanked her anyway, and grabbed my keys. In the reflection of the microwave door, I saw her flinch. At work, she tried to pull me into alignment meetings that had nothing to do with my role. Framed as collaboration. Framed as concern. I declined politely. No excuses. Just unavailability. Watching her explain my absence to others was like watching someone defend a position that no longer existed. Evan unraveled quietly. Missed deadlines stacked. His confidence thinned. Without my corrections cushioning the gaps, his charisma had nothing to lean on. Sarah worked overtime to compensate, but the more she covered, the more visible the imbalance became. People don't resent failure as much as they resent favoritism. One evening, I came home to the living room rearranged. The couch angled differently. Lamps repositioned. Hulu paused on a screen she hadn't pressed play on. She said she wanted the space to feel warmer. More connected. I told her it looked fine. She asked if we could sit together. I sat. She leaned closer than she had in weeks, her knee brushing mine. I didn't move away. I didn't move closer. The distance stayed exactly where it was. She started talking about stress, about burnout, about how work had blurred lines she didn't mean to cross. She never said his name. She didn't need to. The omission did the work for her. She reached for my hand. I let her touch it. I didn't close my fingers around hers. That was when she said she missed me. Not love. Not intimacy. Me. The irony almost made me smile. That night, she tried to sleep curled against my back. Her breath shallow, careful, like she was afraid of waking something that had already left. I lay still, eyes open, counting the seconds between her breaths, aware of how completely she depended on my response now. The next morning, I drove straight to work, no stops. No Dunkin', no rituals, just movement. At lunch, I didn't go to Chick-fil-A. I stayed in my car, watching the building, watching people enter and exit like variables in a model I'd already solved. I understood something then with unsettling clarity. She didn't want intimacy. She wanted absolution. And I wasn't offering either. The confession didn't come the way movies teach you to expect it. No tears. No dramatic pause. Just pressure, building until something had to give. She started checking my location. Not openly. Casually. Asking when I'd be home. Mentioning traffic I hadn't complained about. Timing her messages to moments I usually drove. I let it happen. Control reveals itself fastest when it thinks it's subtle. At work, the dynamic finally broke. Evan missed a deliverable in front of leadership. No buffer. No explanation that landed. Sarah stepped in too quickly, her voice sharp, defensive in a way HR professionals are trained to avoid. The room went quiet. Favoritism doesn't need proof. It needs repetition. I said nothing. I didn't need to. That evening, she came home earlier than usual. No Best Buy bag. No distractions. Just her, standing in the kitchen while I rinsed a mug. She said we needed to talk. Not soon. Not later. Now. I dried my hands and sat across from her. Neutral posture. Neutral face. I didn't prompt her. She talked about burnout again. About blurred boundaries. About how work had gotten complicated. She still didn't say his name. She didn't have to. The space where it should have been did the work. Then she said she'd made a mistake. Not mistakes. A mistake. Singular. Controlled. Framed. I listened like I listened to bad data. Calm. Attentive. Waiting for the pattern to reveal itself. She said it hadn't meant anything. She said it was physical. She said it hadn't changed how she felt about me. Each sentence was designed to reduce impact, to keep the system intact. When she finally said Evan's name, it sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the car. I nodded once. She watched my face for reaction, for anger, for relief, for forgiveness. I gave her nothing. That silence broke something in her. She reached across the table, her hands shaking, and asked if I was going to leave. I told her no. That answer landed wrong. She expected distance, finality, something she could categorize. Instead, I stayed. That night, she turned Hulu on out of habit and didn't watch a second of it. She kept glancing at me, like I might dissolve if she blinked too long. I sat there, present, unreachable, the way I had for weeks. Later, in bed, she tried to touch me the way she used to. Not boldly, carefully, like someone testing ice. I didn't pull away. I didn't respond. In the dark, I felt her realize something terrifying. I wasn't withholding intimacy. I was done needing it from her. And she knew, without me saying a word, that this was the part she couldn't undo. After the confession, she shifted into repair mode. Not emotionally, operationally. She started asking permission for things she used to assume. If I wanted dinner. If I minded her working late. If I was okay with her phone on the table. Each question carried the same subtext. Am I still allowed to matter here? I answered politely, briefly, the way you acknowledge a process you no longer rely on. At work, the consequences caught up to her faster than she expected. HR doesn't survive rumors of favoritism, even when they're true. Especially when they're true. Evan was reassigned quietly. No announcement. No explanation. Just absence. She came home that night pale, speaking in careful generalities about restructuring and optics. I listened the way I listened to weather reports. Not my storm anymore. She tried to reclaim routines. Suggested grocery runs. Suggested shows. Suggested weekends away. I agreed to none of it and refused none of it either. Indecision unsettles people who depend on outcomes. One morning, she got up early and brought me coffee. Dunkin', still warm. She set it down gently, like it might bruise. She watched me take a sip. Waited for something to cross my face. Gratitude. Nostalgia. Hope. I said thank you. That was it. The silence between us grew heavier after that. Not tense. Dense. She filled it with effort. I let it stay filled. That evening, she sat closer than usual and asked if we could talk about us. Not about the affair. About what I needed now. The question was late. That mattered. I told her I didn't know. That wasn't true, either. I knew exactly what I needed. I needed distance that didn't require explanation. I needed autonomy inside proximity. I needed my nervous system to believe I could exist without being evaluated. She started crying then. Quietly. Controlled. Like someone afraid of breaking a rule, even while breaking down. She said she felt invisible. She said she didn't know how to reach me anymore. I didn't respond. Later, in bed, she asked if I would ever want her again. Not love. Want. The word hung there, stripped of power. I told her I didn't feel that way right now. That answer landed harder than anger would have. I felt it in the way her breath caught, in the way she turned onto her side and faced the wall. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, understanding the final shape of this. She had mocked my need for intimacy because it gave her leverage. I had removed myself because it gave me peace. Now she was the one reaching. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to be reached at all. The end didn't come with a decision. It arrived as a condition. We continued living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, sharing space without sharing access. She moved carefully now, like someone afraid of triggering an alarm she didn't know how to disable. I stayed steady, predictable, calm. That unnerved her more than anything else. At work, she transferred departments, framed it as a fresh start. I didn't comment. Evan was gone entirely by then, his absence sealed with the kind of quiet HR prefers. No one said his name anymore. The system corrected itself. At home, she tried to rebuild meaning through gestures. Notes. Meals. Sitting beside me while Hulu played, pretending proximity was progress. I let it happen without investing. Presence without participation is a difficult thing to endure. One evening, we did groceries again. Walmart. Same aisles, same rhythm. She walked half a step behind me this time. At checkout, she didn't reach for my hand. That felt like respect. Or resignation. I couldn't tell which. Later that night, she asked if I thought we were broken. I told her I thought we were different. That answer didn't comfort her. It wasn't meant to. A few days later, I sat alone in my truck after work, engine off, hands resting on the wheel. No Duncan. No distractions. Just quiet. I realized I wasn't waiting to feel something anymore. I already felt settled. Inside the house, she was watching something she wouldn't remember tomorrow. I stood in the doorway for a moment, unseen, understanding the final shape of this life. She had once told me intimacy was childish, that adults didn't need reassurance, that wanting closeness was a weakness. What she hadn't understood was that I wasn't asking for intimacy. I was offering it. And when she mocked that offer, I withdrew it completely. Now she asked for it carefully, respectfully. Too late. I never yelled, never accused, never left. I simply stopped reaching. And in doing so, I took back the only thing that mattered to me. Myself. Some endings are loud, explosive, public. This one was quiet. And it stayed that way. She mocked my need for intimacy. Now she was the one asking. And I had already learned how to live without needing an answer. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.